Thank you so much for attending our virtual community meeting on the Bus Stop Improvement Plan, or BSIP. My name is Michaela Wright-Petrick, and I work for the Government and Community Affairs team at SamTrans. Right now, I'll walk through a few housekeeping items and meeting logistics. Everyone is currently muted. During the presentation, we will have staff monitoring the chat on Zoom. As Patty mentioned, you can type your question by opening the chat box on the bottom of your screen. And we will read these questions out loud during the feedback section at the end of the meeting. We will do our best to get to all of the questions in the time allotted. And in the event that we aren't able to answer your question,
Contestar su pregunta, por favor.
係嘅話咧，請你將跟
emailing us at bsip@samtrans.com. And if somebody from our team could please put that email address in the chat box so everyone has access, that would be great. As Patty mentioned, we will be recording this meeting for note-taking purposes, and we'll post the recording on the project website in the coming weeks. And for those listening in Spanish, Mandarin, Cantonese, or Tagalog, we are going to drop links to the translated versions of the PowerPoint into the chat now so that you can view it while we present. So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Your feedback is incredibly important to us. And without further ado, I'll pass it off to Daniel Shockley, Principal Planner for SamTrans, who will walk us through the presentation.
Thanks, Michaela. Daniel Shockley here. As Michaela said, I'm a Principal Planner in the Strategic Planning team at SamTrans. Also joined by Justin Hong, who's a Senior Planner, also on the team. And we are here to, as Michaela said, we are here to introduce the Bus Stop Improvement Plan project, which we've been working on, and to provide an overview of what we're trying to do with the project, including the goals, our expected outcomes, and this project scope. We'll also talk a little bit about the current state of SamTrans bus stops. So what's the context for why we're doing this study. We'll talk about the schedule, go over a little summary of the work to date, which includes some of the tools we used in our existing conditions piece, as well as kind of a sample of bus stop conditions today in the SamTrans network, as well as some of the feedback we've heard from city staff and our other local partners. And then to wrap it up, we'll have a discussion about the project's next steps and some other outreach activities that we're currently that are currently ongoing. And we'll have some discussion and time for Q&A at the end. So with that, the project goal of BSIP, our kind of motto for the project, is to provide a comfortable, convenient, and dignified experience for passengers at bus stops. And what were the outcomes of this project are, there's 3 of them. So we are looking to not only expand our inventory internally of existing bus stops in the SamTrans network, but we're also going to take the opportunity to revisit some of the guidelines we have as they relate to bus stops from a policy perspective. And then finally will be the actual implementation plan of proposed improvements to bus stops. So what am I talking about when I talk about bus stop improvements for this project? What we're really focusing on here in the scope of the project is the amenities and the features of bus stops. So what does that mean? So we're talking about shelters, trash cans, system information, real-time information signs, benches, and things of that nature. So very much focused on the user experience of our stops. And I also wanted to note a couple other stop-related efforts that are ongoing at SamTrans. First is, so you might be wondering, are we looking at moving stops or consolidating stops or anything of that nature? In this study, we are not. So this is really focused on the amenities that are at the bus stop, the placement of stops, where they go on a route and how far apart should they be, things like that are governed by another policy that's already in place. We call that the SamTrans Service Policy Framework. So we won't be moving stops or anything like that as part of this project. And then separate from this project, but happening at the same time, is a project to evaluate accessibility from an ADA perspective of our stops and propose ADA related improvements. So wheelchair access and things like that. The BSIP project won't be making any ADA specific recommendations. Again, it's purely focused on the user experience, the amenities of the stop. But to the extent that we hear feedback related to ADA and accessibility through the course of this project, we're in close communication with the ADA accessibility project team, and we're forwarding all the relevant comments to that effort over to them. So that's what we're focusing on in this study. And there's a couple different reasons why now is a great opportunity, a great time for us to be doing a project like this. So there's three different reasons. The first is increases in opportunities and community interest. So with the passage of some recent legislation in Sacramento, notably changes to the California Environmental Quality Act, or also known as CEQA, there's a lot more funding opportunities for improvements to public transportation, including improvements to bus stops. So that's one. Senate Bill 743, I believe, was the legislation which brought about these CEQA changes. And we're also seeing an increase in other grant opportunities around the state. So there's another grant program the state runs called the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, which also provides a revenue stream, or rather a funding stream for bus stop improvements. So all around, we're just seeing a lot more bus stop related activity and interest, both at the state government level and also from the community, which has always had a highly sustained interest in our bus stops. The second reason is that we really want to take the time to update our bus stop design guidelines and policies. So the SamTrans, we currently have a bus stop design guidebook that was last updated in 2013. And frankly, it's in need of updates to bring it into alignment with best practices from what we're seeing with other agencies around the Bay Area and also the country. And more specifically, I'm talking about how should our stops interact with bicycle and pedestrian facilities and other micro mobility devices. So, what this means is if there's a bus stop and a really nice bicycle lane together in the same place, what's the ideal solution for how those two things should be interacting with each other? So that's currently something that we don't have great policy direction on, and we could really, there's room for improvement there. We also need to revisit how we handle requests for bus stop improvements. So there's sort of a loose process in place currently, but what we lack is a strong policy direction to tell us, the staff of SamTrans, where should we be putting amenities and under what circumstances are appropriate for certain amenities to be placed. So we have, for example, bus shelters. Where should we put those? We have some loose criteria for that right now, but we think there's room for improvement in how we define the policy direction for things such as that. Where should we be putting these things? And then how should we consider bus stops in light of the equity priority areas that were an outgrowth of our Reimagine SamTrans project? So we have identified areas in the counties that are more transit reliant than others, and through an analysis of demographic information and things of that nature. So this is new information that we have that we would like to be able to incorporate into our guidelines as well. So there's a lot of things kind of that really need to be tied together with regards to how we look at our bus stops from a policy perspective. And the third piece of this is that the ownership and responsibilities of bus stops in this county is somewhat complex and unclear. So as you know, there's over 20 cities. We have bus stops in over 20 cities, 3 different counties. We also have bus stops that are within Caltrans right away with other transit agencies. And mixed up in all of that is the fact that because of this, we don't necessarily own the property upon which our stops are placed. And some stops have amenities and infrastructure that's been installed by SamTrans. Some stops have things like that are installed by cities themselves or developers. And when it comes down to who's responsible for maintaining these things or who is responsible for handling customer service requests regarding them, it can be a little unclear how to handle things like that. So we're hoping to tighten that up and streamline it a little bit, how we handle these things. And like I mentioned, developers and cities also have in the past placed their own bus stop amenities through the course of a development project. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and I think through this project we're trying to better understand the relationship between all of them when it comes to our stops and try to look for efficiencies where we can. So in a project like this, stakeholder engagement is very important, obviously. So we've looked at all the various stakeholders in our bus stops, and we've identified 3 different categories of them. So the first is riders. We are looking to understand what our riders prefer when it comes to various amenities. We sort of know generally from survey work we've done for previous projects like Reimagine SamTrans, what people like at stops in a general way. But what we're hoping to add to that is under a constrained scenario, or if we had to choose one thing over the other, either due to cost or available space or some other constraint, what would our riders like to see over what are some amenities that our riders would like to see if they had to choose one, right? So we have, if there was a constrained sidewalk and we could put, for example, a shelter or a trash can, which would our riders prefer to see and under what context? So we're looking into that using a public survey, which is available on the internet right now. We're also looking to have more in-depth one-on-one interviews, listening sessions with targeted rider groups who are typically not represented well in projects like this and are, may not have the ability to go to a board meeting on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. So we're trying to be very intentional with our outreach here to make sure that all the voices of our riders are captured in our feedback that we collect. The other 2 groups are cities. So we're working extensively with our local partners throughout the county, really trying to understand what are the barriers to the processes around implementing bus stop improvements and how do cities view working with SamTrans on various bus stop projects. And we're doing this through what we call the public agency working groups, which is sort of a forum for us to gather staff from all cities in the county, which is our service area, and really kind of dig into the weeds about what it's like from their perspective to work on these kinds of things. And we got a lot of great feedback from them. I'll kind of touch on that later in the presentation. And then lastly, there's a variety of different organizations and committees that deal in transportation issues. And so with them, we're really trying to spread awareness of the project and get feedback from them. And we're doing it through numerous presentations like this one. So that brings us to the project schedule. We did kick off this project in the summer of 2022, and the first piece of the work was the existing conditions analysis. So that included a literature review, peer agency interviews. So we talked to other transit agencies in the Bay Area and asked them what they do with regards to their stops. And this included the expansion of our internal bus stop inventory, which I mentioned earlier. This was also when we did the first round of public agency working groups. In the winter and spring of 2023, which we're sort of in the second half of currently, we are working on revising the bus stop guidelines. So this includes policy review, creating bus stop typologies, which I'll talk about those in a few minutes as well. And we're also reevaluating the design specifications for things like the shelters and the benches and things like that to see if there's to see what's new in the industry and in the world of bus stop shelter manufacturing, to see if we can capitalize on any improvements made in that industry. With regards to stakeholders, during this time, we are actually at this moment about to embark on the rider listening sessions. We have the survey, which is out now, and we're doing stakeholder presentations. The next piece of the project will be the improvement analysis. So this will be taking place in the spring and summer of 2023. This is where we are going to take the revised guidelines, which I mentioned earlier, and the typologies. And what we will do at that point is apply those to all of our existing stops and identify the needed improvements that we would have to make in order to bring us into compliance with our own policy. So we'll have just a whole list of recommended improvements. These would be individual projects, and then we would go through and prioritize those improvements along a few different criteria, which would include not just the cost and the feasibility of implementing the improvement, but we also want to layer in equity criteria to make sure that we're targeting resources to communities that may need it the most. May ride transit a lot, and so we'd want to make sure that we're accounting for that in how we approach these projects. And finally, with the summer and fall of 2023 would be the production of the final plan. So this would include we'll take the prioritized list of improvements and sort of package those to different phases, and then start thinking about longer term. What is the long-term capital improvement plan going to be? When are we going to implement these? We'll look at the funding, what's the strategy for financing these projects, and we'll produce the final plan. We would also re-engage with our public agency working group at this time, just to give them an update on where we are at with the project. So in the second half of the presentation here, I just wanted to kind of give a quick overview of some of the work we've done already and just some progress that we've made, and just share some information with everyone, information that's been coming out of the project lately. So the first is about the existing bus stop conditions analysis. So just talking about, this is something that I personally find very cool about the project. So we used a GIS sort of web map based tool to expand this inventory. So we had a whole team of analysts just poring over Google Maps and looking at Street View and aerial photography to identify a lot of additional contextual information about the stops, which includes operational considerations like red curve. Is there a red curve in front of the bus stop? Are there, driveways or other potential obstructions nearby? These are things that we haven't collected historically. Even going so far as to note the land use and the urban context around the stop, just to give us as much information as we possibly can to, as a firm foundation for us as we move forward. And to the extent that there were some outliers where we couldn't really identify what was going on based on the imagery, myself and Justin went out there in the field and did some good old-fashioned field work to verify the information. And what came out of that is sort of in this slide, just a very high-level summary of the current state of our bus stops. Maybe no surprise to some folks here if you're familiar with SamTrans, but 68% of our stops in fact have no amenities of note. So it's really a pole in the ground or a pole in the sidewalk. And that's really, the majority of stops in our system. But with 16% of stops having at least some kind of place to sit, and then 13% of stops you might consider to be a air quotes shelter, or a complete stop with a shelter and some kind of place to sit. So again, just a high level summary of some of the findings from our existing conditions work. We also heard a lot of interesting things from the city staff we talked to in our public agency working group sessions. The first, very interesting to me, is that really cities are looking to SamTrans for leadership on what our bus stop should look like. So what we heard was that unless a city had really invested a lot of time or money into some kind of specific plan for, say, like a downtown area, or if there was some kind of large development ongoing which encompassed our bus stops, unless those things were happening or had happened, cities generally are not really looking at stops and thinking proactively about what kind of improvements should be made. So there's definitely sort of a desire for SamTrans to be more direct about what our expectations are and what we would like to see at our bus stops. We also heard that maintenance costs are challenging. And this is certainly something that we know internally from the stops that we do maintain. And through our conversations, there was some openness to the idea of some kind of cost sharing agreement, things of that nature, to try and mitigate some of these O&M costs to lower the barrier to implementing stop improvements. And so that's something I am hopeful that we can explore through the course of this project. And finally, cities expressed sort of a confusion about what exactly what our stop improvement processes are. So they expressed a desire for a single point of contact for SamTrans with regards to making bus stop improvements, and a desire for more of a refined policy for handling stop improvements. So that's also something that we're excited to be visiting through the course of this work. So next steps for the project. I mentioned earlier the bus stop typologies or categories. So this is a major component of revising the guidelines. And so essentially what this means is that we'll be looking at all of our stops, looking at all the data we collected in the expanding existing conditions work, and looking for a common thread or some kind of commonality between different stops in order to put them into different groups. One major thing we're looking at is the level of service that we provide to a stop. So you might have a high frequency stop or a local stop, just depending on how often per hour we serve it, for example. And so this would be the bus stop category. And the idea is that it would be easy to look at a stop and sort of intuitively know what category it falls into. And the intention of doing this is that we could attach different amenity criteria and guidelines to each different category as a way to determine what amenities should be there, sort of in a simple and intuitive way. Not only does it do that for us, but it helps us to rationalize why some stops should have certain amenities instead of other stops, for example. We're also in the process of updating our bus stop design guidelines right now. So our goal with this document is that it should be an easy to use document for us to share with not only internally amongst SamTrans staff, but also with our local partners and staff at cities and other agencies. Anybody who might potentially want to make some kind of improvement to a SamTrans bus stop and they don't know what they should do, we could give them this document, and it would be almost a how to determine the category, how to assess what amenities we would like to see there, and then what the sort of specifications for those amenities are. So, shelters, required spacing, things of that nature. And we intend to root this document in industry best practice and industry standards, and to make sure that it also reflects collaboration between internal departments at SamTrans, so we're consistent across the board with how we talk about this. So finally, to wrap it up, this slide has a summary of our upcoming outreach activities. So first, I'll note we do have a website, samtrans.com/BSIP. You can find an overview of the project there. Presentations and materials will be posted there. And we do have a link to the survey, which is on the website. You can also see it here on the slide. And a quick summary of the events we have coming up between now and the 30th. So this is kind of like our main outreach campaign period. We'll have our ambassadors, people out on the street at our bus stops, handing out information about the project to riders. We'll also be conducting the listening sessions. And we're having a multilingual virtual community meeting, which you're all here. So thank you for that. You're in attendance at this meeting. And just a variety of other stakeholder presentations we're doing throughout this time. So yeah, that's a summary of what we are doing for outreach. And yeah, so this is actually really the end of my presentation. And so I think I'm going to hand it off to Michaela in a second here, but we do have some discussion questions, as Michaela mentioned at the start of this. Your feedback is super important to us. Like I said earlier, also, you really can't do a project like this. You can't do it right without really good feedback from the community, the stakeholders, the riders. So we have these questions to help kind of spur a discussion. We'll also be doing a Q&A in just a moment here, but I'll just read you the questions and then we can sort of move on to that. So the questions are, in your view, what bus stop amenities are the most important? So when you're at a bus stop, what are you looking for? You know, maybe it's a hot day or a windy day. You really want that shelter so you can kind of protect yourself from the elements. Or maybe it's information. You want to know when the next bus is coming. Are you looking for a real-time information display? Or maybe just a, traditional paper map? Maybe you want a place to sit. What is it that you look for when you consider a good stop? What image comes to your mind? The second question is, how would you characterize the experience of contacting SamTrans for a bus stop related issue? So if you're in attendance and you're a rider or you're just interested in a project, have you ever called customer service? Have you sent us an email? What's that experience been like? Were we able to help you? Maybe if you're a member, if you're in attendance and you work for a city or you're some partner of ours in local government, how has it been working with us at a staff level? So we're very interested to know, what can we do to make the process of contacting us and getting information? What can we do to make that better? The third question is, where do you think bus stop amenities should be focused? So with this one, it's sort of related to the first, but if you have a thought about, hey, a bus stop next to a school really should have a bench, things of that nature. Are there certain situations where you think some amenities are more important or should be prioritized over others? And lastly, we're interested to know what you think some of the primary obstacles to using SamTrans bus stops are. Are they hard to get to, hard to find? Have you ever run into some kind of issue when trying to just find out where to go to get the bus? So I hope that really has gotten your thoughts going. I'm very interested to hear what everyone has to say and answer any questions. And I'll hand it off to Michaela at this point.
Thanks, Daniel. So if anybody has any feedback or thoughts on these questions, you can put it in the chat. You can send us an email at BSIP@samtrans.com. And you can also raise your hand. I should be able to unmute you if you'd like to speak up. And now is a great time to, either give your feedback or if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Looks like we have a raised hand, so I am going to try to call on you now. Vivian. So please,
Hello.
go ahead.
I'm a regular SamTrans user. I only use public transportation. I'm on a route which has not the best of facilities. I live in Pacifica. So where I stand from my bus, I'm exposed to the wind and the rain. And one of the main obstacles to actually getting on a bus is I have to stand in the middle of the road because the red lines don't prevent people from parking there. So I think that and I know that Pacifica is considered a low ridership area, but I really think you should give some substantive thought to actually providing protection for the people who are using the facilities, especially if you want people to get out of their cars. The second point I want to make is you really do need to distinguish between the facilities that are provided in the intermodal stations and these SamTrans bus stops en route. The intermodal stations, if you take Colmar, for example, are a disgrace. The windows were knocked out and were missing there for 2 years before they actually needed a program on the news to actually get them repaired. They're extremely uncomfortable, they're cold, and they're miserable. The thought that the people who are designing this really need to get into your head and take an example from the way intermodal stations operate in the different parts of the world is that they need to have provisions like places to sit, to have coffee, to buy a newspaper. You need to think outside the box and stop providing these very basic third world intermodal stations which exist almost over the area. I mean, you just have to look at San Bruno. It's a wind tunnel there. I mean, the whole area really doesn't need thinking. And we always have these conversations. And in fact, nothing really, quite frankly, ever gets changed. We had 2 years of discussion on proper bus streaming and in buses talking to each other in terms of timetables. Nothing really changed with that. The buses miss each other, they don't cross on the schedule. So I really think you should use these opportunities really to think outside the box and really do something rather than, it's all very nice public relations operations these are, but as somebody who uses a system all the time, I really can see the way it needs improving, and you should listen to some of us who do use the system all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, for your comments and your question. I think, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, I'm familiar with the 2 intermodal stations you mentioned, and yeah, they're not, I'll be honest, they're not great. So I think that, well, first, I really appreciate you kind of bringing this up and really trying to motivate us to be very creative and address these real problems that exist out in our system. We will try. I can't at this moment say that I'm going to wave a magic wand and sort of make it immediately better, but I just want to express to you just first my thanks for saying all of that, and that I agree with you. And I think through the course of this project, I know it'll sound more like, happy words, but we're really trying to make an effort to reach out to our local partners with whom we share a lot of these, particularly the intermodal stops, to really see if we can just create a forum to begin addressing some of these. So also with regards to the wind in the coast side, that is something that we've heard a lot about as well. So I think we're also trying to think outside the box, as you say, with regards to how we can look at some of the new trends in what's being manufactured, like what are the manufacturers making these days, to see how we can really kind of address that in these in our recommendations. So thank you.
Okay, great. Looks like we have another question. How is this study looking into making bus stops work better with bikes, pedestrians, etc.?
Yeah, another good question. So as I mentioned, what we're trying to do is incorporate a lot of the best practice with regard to bicycle and pedestrian interaction that we're seeing not only with other operators here in the Bay Area, but also around the country nationally. So there's a lot of great guidance that involve, that recommends various treatments like floating bus islands where you have the bicycle lane sort of go behind an extension of the curb into the road to keep separation from not only the bus but also the waiting passengers there at the bus stops. So there's a lot of really great recent advancements and advancements in thinking and infrastructure that we hope to incorporate to the extent possible in our revised guidelines. So very excited about that personally.
Okay, looks like we have another hand raised, so I am going to allow James. You should be able to.
Hello. Can you hear
for
me
it.
right?
Yep.
Cool. Hi, I'm James Coleman, City Council here in South San Francisco, but speaking on my own behalf. Thank you so much for hosting this. It's a great forum that you're hosting. So a couple things. One, in South San Francisco, we get a lot of wind, we get a lot of rain, we get a lot of sun sometimes. And so it would be really great to have bus stop covers that provide shade and shield from the weather, and also glass walls that they're shielded from the wind. And another feature that is pretty common in other bus stops that I've seen, across this country and across other countries, is that they have digital signs that tell you when the next bus is going to arrive, whether it's 3 minutes, 15 minutes, or if it's just not going to come. And the worst thing is having someone wait at a bus stop for 45 minutes to an hour and then realize, oh wait, the bus is not going to come. So we should have a digital billboard that kind of lets people know when the next bus is going to come, and as well as what lines each bus stop serves. And that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Noted on the wind and the rain. I think with regards to the real-time information, that's also something we're very excited to be looking at in this project. We do have, sort of a handful of real-time info signs out there, mostly at our transit stations. But I think the industry in that area has also advanced a lot recently too. There's a lot of really great sort of low cost, highly durable options for signage out there. So yeah, I just wanted to respond and say that's something we're definitely looking at. Thank you.
All right, I am seeing another question here. How will you prioritize the bus stop improvements that you recommend?
Yeah, another great question. So as I said earlier, we expect to have a pretty lengthy list of recommended improvements coming out of this. We have 1,800 stops in our network, and we're going to be looking at each of those and comparing them to the new guidelines once those are ready. So we're going to have a lot of projects throughout the county that we're going to have to think about how to implement and when to implement them. So yes, we will have to prioritize the projects. And we're looking at a few different criteria for doing that. As I sort of alluded to earlier in the project presentation, we obviously there's like cost considerations, the feasibility, how much construction may be required, who do we have to coordinate with, get permits from, and things of that nature. So those are going to be two very real influences on what we can do and when we can do it. But we also want to make sure that we're being equitable in our distribution of investments. So we want to layer in sort of an equity component to, I mentioned the SamTrans equity priority areas. So there's sort of existing metrics out there that can help guide us. Also, qualitatively, we are expecting to hear back from the survey soon, which is closing in a couple of weeks, as well as the listening sessions. So to the extent we hear, through the course of our public outreach, anything that might influence how we prioritize things, we'll be taking that into consideration too. We haven't quite finalized how exactly we're going to do this, so I don't have a precise answer quite yet, but we are wanting to prioritize things beyond simply cost and feasibility.
Thanks, Daniel. Okay, I've got another one. Who should I contact at SamTrans if I have a question or comment about my bus stop?
Yes. So in general, if you have a question comment or concern about your bus stop, we encourage you to call the SamTrans customer service line. It's an 800 number, which you can find on our website, or maybe one of my colleagues could put it in the chat as well, but it's fairly easy to find. And they will help address your feedback to us. If you do have comments or questions kind of specific to this BSIP project, we have the website, which I mentioned earlier, samtrans.com/BSIP, and we have a project-specific email, BSIP, BSIP, @samtrans.com.
Great, thank you. And okay, see another one here. When can we expect to see changes at bus stops?
Yeah, so right now we are focused on wrapping up the study piece of this. So that, as I mentioned, we're targeting the end of 2023 to have that wrapped up and the plan and the recommendations adopted by our board. So we would not expect anything sooner than that until the study phase is done. We would also need to complete the prioritization, which I mentioned earlier, and really have the blueprint for capital investments laid out in front of us before we'll start any sort of construction. So all that is to say that I cannot say specifically when that would happen, but it would be at the earliest after this calendar year. To the extent we do have projects happening, we have sort of outreach protocols and things of that nature. So stay tuned, and we'll be sure to update you when those things happen.
Thank you. Councilmember Coleman, I see that you have a hand raised. I don't know if it's the same question. Oh, but I guess not. It just went down. So I will jump to another question then. Let's see. I think one of these we've already answered. So will this study be removing bus stops?
The study will not be proposing to remove, consolidate, or change or otherwise change the location of bus stops. So like I said at the top of this presentation, this is strictly a study focused on the user experience of our stops. So that encompasses the amenities and sort of the hardware installed at SamTrans bus stops. So that's shelters, benches, trash cans, signage, real-time signage, and things of that nature. The determination of where stops should be placed is more of an operational question, which is governed by a separate policy document that's aside from what we're doing with this project. So short answer, no, not with this project.
Okay, thanks. Here's another question. How will I know if my bus stop will be getting any new improvements as a result of this study?
Yeah, so once the study is complete and we have the board approval and the final plan is done, we will have the list of recommended improvements will be a part of that plan. So once that's finalized and available, it will be available on the SamTrans website, samtrans.com/BSIP. And there you can see the total of the recommendations that we are intending to implement at our stops. Kind of getting back to the earlier question about when, that may not be determined at the end of this calendar year, but you will at least know that we have identified improvements and what those are and what stops we've identified improvements for.
Okay, I'm seeing one last question here. So I'll take this and just call out final call for questions. Daniel, I've got one more unless somebody thinks of one at the last minute, but how will the survey results and what you hear from the community be included in the bus stop improvement plan? What are we going to take away from this community meeting and all the other meetings that we've had?
Yeah, I think the number one thing we're going to try to use the feedback we've collected for is both primarily the prioritization of what amenities we should be implementing first. That's sort of the main objective of our survey, is to help us understand what our riders' priorities and preferences are. And then to the extent we hear any sort of relevant feedback, for example, the wind and the rain is a problem in certain areas, we'll try to consider that in the guidelines that we propose as well.
Okay, with that, I do not see any other questions that have come through or any hands. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to join us tonight. We really appreciate your feedback, your questions, and just a few final things. This presentation, along with additional information, will be posted on the project website at www.samtrans.com/BSIP, BSIP. And you can take the bus stop survey. If you haven't done it already, please go ahead and fill that out at www.samtrans.com/bus-stop-survey. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and we hope you have a great evening.